Hello, my friends. I'm Rick, and this is your seat at the table. And I've been looking at my intro. Maybe I need to make an adjustment on it, just what's all BattleTech stuff for now. Because sooner or later, we got a ways to go before I get through all my BattleTech material. One of the things that's taking a little longer for my review of the supplements of books and things that I do have is obviously that I'm going into various subcategories plus my personal opinions and takes on things, and I've seen to get some decent comments and views for those sort of videos. I recently ran across another YouTube channel for BattleTech. This person explains the history and the backstory of BattleTech on a level that is not quite text level, but pretty close to the Black Pants Legion. Definitely far superior to anything that I can produce, and I really wish I could be at that category level. Just his eloquence of speaking is seriously, superior to mine, and I acknowledge that. I'm a 55-year-old grognard with set in my ways with, not the best damn education in the world. Compared to some folks, I'm not, I'm a bit of an introvert, to be truthful, but also bombastic, opinionated, and not very articulated, as you can tell sometimes in my conversations and conversing on the channel. But I do make my effort and my love for the material as abundant as possible. Down the road, like I said, I still have my entire Shallow Run collection to go through yet, and then start dipping into my Forgotten Realms and various ages of Dungeons and Dragon material for the channel. We're talking sometime down the road. I might at some point start introducing some of that in between BattleTech videos as I've done in the past. I still have one or two war games yet to review that I haven't got quite to yet, but that's neither here nor there. And what we're looking at today is the smaller bandit states in the Periphery, and each one is deserving of an entry by itself, and I think that that's what I'm going to do. So I want to start with the Marian Hegemony today, because of the bandit states, it's one of my favorites, and unlike most of the older periphery nation states, the larger periphery states, the bandit kingdoms, and we use that term a bit loosely because in reality, most of them are still very new. This is what sets a bandit kingdom, in my opinion, apart from a periphery state. The periphery states have been long established. They have hundreds and hundreds of years of history, and all of the existing ones today predate the Starlight, where your upstarts, new starts, deep periphery places, and we'll look at some of those down the road too, because there's some pretty interesting ones that are really out in the fringes that don't get a lot of press, in my opinion. The bandit kingdoms are bandit holds or mercenary units gone bad. People have found themselves at the fringes of society, the very extreme edges, and they have to make a living somehow. And some of them are pretty notorious and nefarious things. And the locations that they inhabit and operate out of are also notorious. And on occasion, see forays from the major houses and periphery states to come out and put them down or put them out of their way to eliminate them. But a handful, have been established long enough, a generation or two, to have started down the path of becoming a full-on house. And what stipulates, what makes the difference between a nation state, an inner sphere house, and a periphery house, compared to, what is the standard? How many, is it got to be a set amount of worlds? I mean, obviously the great houses of the inner sphere are the largest. They have the most territory, the most resources, the largest populations, etc. They've been around a long time. The periphery powers, Magistracy Canopus, Turing Concordat, the Outworld Alliance, once again, are almost or as old as the great houses of the inner sphere. The differences is that they had a lot more. I mean, that's not true. The inner sphere has had more than their share of conflict and instigating it and being on the receiving end of it, just as the periphery states. Um, they just have a larger industrial base, a larger economic base, more driven ambitions, perhaps, and more reasons to be as powerful as they are to stay competitive with their neighbors or to get overrun and consumed. Whereas a periphery state, one of the smaller states, size-wise, and I've said this before in previous videos, that any one of the periphery states individually are not going to take on one of the great houses and have a serious chance of winning in a head-to-head conflict. They just don't have the numbers. But if you go to the great houses and you break them down by their core components, which is in reality a series of smaller noble houses and political bodies, look at the Free Worlds League. There's literally several dozen to 3 dozen smaller nation states and minor houses collectively that make up the Free Worlds League. If we look at the House Davion as an example, we have 3 core houses that form the Federated Sons. And House Davion being one, House Hasek being another, and House Sandoval being a third. Within each one of those houses, within House Sandoval, the Draconis March, there are many minor nobles and minor titled fiefdoms that owe their allegiance to the larger political body as well as the Federated Sons, but have their own influences. Now we see this the most pronounced in the Federated Sons. Federated Sons until after 3050, when Thomas Merrick enacts some pretty savvy controls to gain control of majority of the military forces in the Free Worlds League. Most of the client states controlled a big chunk of their military defenses, which they could either dole out to the captain general as they chose, or as they were maneuvered, manipulated, bribed, and or browbeat into, or withhold them, or act independently to some level of autonomy on their own, which is what makes the Free Worlds League such a collective hot mess that it is. But as a periphery state, the Magistracy of Canopus, for example, as we're looking at, this too. Now, house, it has its ruling house, but within it are smaller nation states or smaller political bodies that collectively owe to the larger house and their leadership. Now, some of these these periphery states and inner houses, the system is diversified enough to be different from each other. There's some less than others. I mean, the Lyran Commonwealth is much more stratified when it comes to the nobility system, as opposed to the Free Worlds League, where you see a lot more independent, quote, democracy, variations of just about every political governmental system that survived history can be found in some form within the Free Worlds League. So not every political entity, economic entity is actually controlled by a, quote, noble house, although they tend to traditionally have their leadership that tends to be titled or given titles, whether it's inherited or not, is a case-by-case basis. So we say the same thing when we get out to these bandit kingdoms. So when the initial, quote, bandit lord or warlord or pirate or head pirate or pirate prince or whatever, at some point realizes that they need to sustain their own existence. They can do better than just depending 100% totally on raiding other people and taking their stuff. So over time, they capture the equipment, the economic means, the personnel needed, we call them slaves, whatever you want to call them, the technical expertise that's available, and then they bring them to a central world and started developing their version of a civilization, their version of an economy, some means to support themselves and their endeavors, their military machines specifically, because that's what keeps them in power, without completely 100% being devoted to the need to take that from everybody else and the risks that that brings in. Because in reality, if you're going to be a pirate lord and a pirate prince, having a great location to fall back on, a hold, if you will, is fine and dandy. But eventually, the bigger powers are going to find that hold and they're going to come get you because they're going to get fed up with you taking their stuff. It's just how piracy tends to work. On the other hand, at some point, these leaders have bigger ambitions. And we see that in some of the bandit kingdoms, and majority of them. And they start looking at some of the neighboring worlds, some of which, of course, as I've discussed in previous videos, that trying to colonize your own worlds are costly, difficult, time-consuming, and very risky. The odds are 9 out of 10 colonies will fail, for a whole bucket load of reasons that we don't need to go into details on, but there's a reason why the periphery isn't much more settled than it is, and it's not hard, and it's not always because the lack of suitable planets, because they are suitable planets out there, but for one reason or another, the colony effort that was established just doesn't make a go of it, or they're preyed on by the pirates and bandits and or bandit lords and or other periphery powers and taken advantage of. And then that takes its toll. Or they just collapse internally, politically, socially, what have you. I mean, illness, there's, like I said, we're back to a whole bucket load of reasons of why some of these succeed and some don't. And it's like restaurants. Restaurant business is cutthroat and very hard to get into. There's your favorite restaurant has been around for 30 years. That's because the owners have figured out something. They got some damn good luck they had some really good lucky rolls, and they were able to persevere, and they were diligent in how they managed their business. This matters because for every successful restaurant, I have a customer that's been in business over 40 years, and he's extremely well established, and he's getting up in years, and he's talking retirement here in the next 4 or 5 years. And the reason he's on my mind is because he contacted us yesterday. His grease trap has a problem. He's got a plumber coming out to take care of it on Monday, so he needed me to come there Monday, which means I had to reschedule my Sunday night jobs because I can't work all night and then work half the day too. I'm 55. It takes its toll on me. So anyway, and I'm going to, because we value this man, this business, they've been there a long, long time. I'm going to make that effort, as opposed to that same fellow, Marinos. I have had a dozen restaurants start and fail in this past year, the past 12 months, let alone the last 2 years with COVID. COVID saw us lose about 24 restaurants from closure and failure because they started up and right about the time that COVID hit, or they started up in the year before and they were already struggling, and it finished them off. But those that survived are still there; they're still strong. So the same thing happens. These bandit kings or warlords start looking at the possibilities of, through force, through guile, through bribery, or through mutual protection, or all three, or any other combination of things, expanding their holdings to other already settled systems close by. And at some point, this becomes more of them. And the more you have, the more resources, the manpower, and mutual support you have, the better chances you have of survival. This is where the periphery powers originally got their start. And this is where some of the core houses, the individual internal components making up the great houses, got their start way back the time, the first age of exploration, and the War of Unification, in the years prior, and the Age of War goes back on and on and on. That's why I said, listening to this other fellow's channel, he's got a lot of he's broke down a lot of that older stuff and so what I've seen of it so far, it's been some really good stuff, and I recommend looking at his material. If you like that sort of thing, you like BattleTech, you obviously listening to my ramble, you'll enjoy his stuff without a doubt. So when we look at these upstarts, The question would be is 100 years, 200 years down the road, will the Marian hegemony still be an entity? Will it be a much larger entity? Will it be a much more successful entity? The current leadership of the Marian hegemony is doing its level best to make that happen in their own ham-fisted ways, and some are much more ham-fisted than others, right? So, you know, we have to go and look at them on a case-by-case, individual basis, and then ask ourselves, will they have a chance of succeeding, so on and so forth. All right, so let's see, bandit kingdoms, and at some point, I don't think it's fair to call them a bandit kingdom anymore. They reach us. I don't know where the break off point would be. A dozen planets, half dozen planets. Enough military resources to field 3 regiments worth of machinery, X amount of economic base, you know, a less predominant desire to raid everybody around you for their stuff. I mean, you know, I guess at the end of the day, it's a social political thing. What do their peers and or their greater, you know, those much more higher and advanced above them have to do and say about it? And you know, just so you know, I gotta occasionally wet the whistle. Otherwise, my voice is already cracky and scratchy because it's old and abused. Anyway, and just so you know, I don't smoke, so I get this dry cough once in a while, and I don't have an answer for it. So anyway, the Marian hegemony. Outside the Free Worlds League, between the Ministry of Canopus and the Xerxes Federation, current number of worlds are 8. The current ruler is Marius O'Reilly. Military strength at 1 regiment. Technology level average. Literacy level fair. Now this is circa 3025. The Marian hegemony, recently addition to the Periphery, centered on the trade world of Alphard. Hegemony consists of the remains of the Alphard Trading Corporation. 2920, Johann Sebastian O'Reilly arrived on the desolate, uninhabited planet of Alphard. Though the world seemed like a wasteland, he chanced upon a hidden storehouse of germanium worth at least 50 billion sea bills. With his newfound wealth, O'Reilly hired mech units and established a colony in Alphard. Johann formed his new Marian hegemony along with disciplined lines in ancient Terran Roman Empire during its Republican days. Those arrival of war refugees helped expand the hegemony, whose people began to settle on their star systems in the vicinity. Under the leadership of Johann's grandson, Marius O'Reilly, the Marian hegemony views expansions as a key to survival. In the last decade, the Marian Navy and ground forces, estimated at roughly 3 small battalions of assorted mechs, have clashed repeatedly with their neighbors over possession of border worlds. The hegemony welcomes the presence of Comstar, but only at the price of an annual tribute to the Imperial Treasury. And we got their key world, Alphard, position number 4 in the system, jump point, blah, 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 Comstar Facility B. Capital of the hegemony, Alphard is the center of government formed along the ancient Roman precepts from Terra. Alphard is one of the few treasure troves of Star League technology, particularly of germanium. Beyond this, modest industrial offers the inhabitants a reasonable standard of living and nominal creature comforts. If the hegemony government does not endanger its industry by inviting attack by its neighbors, Alphard becomes a stable economic force in the periphery for generations to come. So we got democracy in action. The typical Marian pirate crew is a mixed lot, ranging from gentlemen and ex-nobles through impoverished farmers gone bad. There was also a good sprinkling of individuals, both male and female, who could only be characterized as the lowest scum. For all this, most were moral enough among themselves. They were starfarers, bands of brothers and sisters with few illusions about what life was really like or where it would lead them. This was in the stark contrast to the sober and solemn bunch that invariably made up the Free World League's border garrisons. Modern-day hegemony privateer, ironically enough, is a democratic sort of organization. Articles of plunder drawn up between the captain and his crew, many of which are on file with Comstar, attest to this fact. Discipline, often brutal, and obedience absolute, are considered essential to the effective shipboard life, and more than often not, anyone found to be derelict in its duty has suffered an unimaginable fate. The situation not entirely one-sided, however, his crew decided that the captain was neglectful of his duty. The man would soon find himself walking out the nearest airlock without a pressure suit. There was, of course, careful attention paid to the equitable division of plunder. Boys and girls under the age of 12 were typically given half shares, at least until the individual killed his first man. Specialists such as technicians, computer operators, mech repair people, and the ship's surgeon generally got a share and a half, with the officers getting double shares and the rest dividing up equally whatever was left over. More often than not, goods and the products seized in a raid were kept in the common pool, and woe to the one who held out on his mates by so much as even half a C note. Once the pilots were safely in space, far from any pursuers, they would divide up the common pool. First, though, came captain's special deductions. Anyone wounded in combat, especially if he lost a limb or suffered other permanent damage, received double shares. A special 10th part of the share was set aside for the grounders back home, those now too old, too lame, too feeble to carry on their evil trade, but who served border well in their time. Democracy, old age pensions, disability benefits, all were the stuff of modern-day periphery privateer. In truth, more than one poor soul found its way into hanging bunk in the bowels of some dark, sneaking privateer for just these reasons, in hopes of making a few extra credits to send home. Pirate bands sometimes offer people more opportunity and quality than they were likely to find in their native worlds in the civilized inner sphere. From the Periphery Privateers by Fiona Del Rio and Durian Press. See, and that's something that, as a fan of the pirate the pirate concept, I've always thought that, yeah, there's some pretty dodgy, pretty foul individuals that are drawn to this life, but there are quite a few people who are either pressed into it or driven by desperation and need. And to find everybody being totally evil cutthroats with the most deranged debauchery mindsets is not being fair. And I think that, not to say that it excuses illegal behavior, but in the situation, what would you do kind of scenario. So we got the biographer Marion O'Reilly, the current leader of the Marian Hegemony. His motivations. Marius views himself as a modern-day Caesar, destined to set the foundation of a glorious empire. Once the inner sphere falls in the war of mutual destruction, he believes that his successors will incorporate vast territories into a grand empire that will last for 1,000 years. Marius is aloof and chooses words carefully, presents himself with the air of a Caesar. So, right? We look at this concept for the hegemony. We got a handful of worlds, a reasonable military setup, and it's just far enough outside of the inner sphere to avoid major confrontation with the Free Worlds League and the neighboring Grey Houses, who are engrossed in some pretty heavy-duty stuff. They also happen to be on the far side of the clan invasions, and when the clans show up, they don't get run over. And potentially down the road, if they manage to survive all the stuff that's coming down the pike, Marius is not wrong. The inner sphere can self-destruct and consume itself in constant warfare, and as we know as players that a lot of that's held true, and the fact that the opportunities to take advantage of tapping into some of those systems that were formerly owned by greater houses or under the influence of other periphery states that are close enough to the hegemony potentially could find themselves becoming members of the hegemony. So we look at the next version, which I have, the Periphery. And we'll take a see what we got in here, because I know there's something here. Let's see, we get a bit more detail from the original. So this would be circa, what, 3059. So we're now talking some 35 years later. 35 years later. So obviously Marinus is probably no longer the head cheese. When in Rome, discussion of Marian Hegemony, one question always arises: why did Jonathan O'Reilly fashion his new government on the model of ancient Rome? No commentary made, and his successors or subject while the Jonah was alive, and his successors appear to be continuing the tradition while questioning its origins or his motives. Therefore, we are left to theorize about this rather odd choice. Many historians have speculated O'Reilly made a choice as a simple matter of taste. Building a government based on a whim may be unfathomable to the inner sphere mind, but this kind of arbitrary policy making can be considered typical in the periphery. It's quite possible that Johann felt the Republican Rome was an ideal civilization that never would have fallen but for the misdeeds of its corrupt leaders. So we go into the hegemony, foundation, and early history, which we've already covered in the 3025 version. The rise of Caesar's son. Between 3035 and 3040, Sean O'Reilly distinguished himself in military service. Scattered rumors reached the imperative of his son's gambling, numerous downlines as women, and infrequent involvement in duels. But Marius passed all these instances off a typical sowing of wild oats. When Sean informed Marius that he would be a grandfather before the end of 3040, the imperator decided it was time to steady his wild son by giving him greater responsibility. A few days after the birth of his grandson, Julius, Marius O'Reilly announced plans to expand the hegemony through colonization. Placed Sean in charge of the operation, a challenge the young man eagerly accepted. Sean spent the next 2 years organizing the necessary equipment personnel to colonize 3 neighboring worlds. Unknown to the imperator, Sean was also siphoning off a portion of the colonization funds for his own personal use. During his 5 years of military service, Sean had run up quite a string of gambling debts. He was also supporting several mistresses on various hegemony worlds. The colonization went smoothly, and by 3045, viable settlements had been established on all 3 planets. Sean then approached his father with a plan to develop a light industry in the colonies using outgoing funds from the imperial treasury. Delighting to see his son as heir applying himself to the business of governing, Marius applauded the initiative and acted the proposal into law. The development scheme proved to be a boon to the new colonies and simultaneously provided Sean with a steady income of illicit monies. In 3046, the imperator stumbled across evidence of his son's illegal activities. Furious at Sean's duplicity, Marius summoned him to Alphard and demanded immediate restitution of the stolen funds. Sean refused. Marius threatened to bar him from succession in favor of 6-year-old Julius. Almost immediately, Sean backed down, promising to mend his ways and repay the imperial treasury as best he could from his limited personal income. As proof of his good faith, he immediately ended relations with 2 of the most expensive of his mistresses, sold the properties he had given them, and signed the money over to the treasury. Grudgingly, Marius relented at the end of the year, publicly reaffirming Sean's status as his heir. Underneath their civil facade, however, both men remained suspicious of one another. The imperative's continuing coolness toward him convinced Sean that his father secretly intended to pass leadership of the Marian Hegemony to Julius, his son. Determined to keep this from happening, Sean began to build a power base within the First Marian Legion. So we get Sean's ascension, 3048, on a visit to one of the new Marian colonies. Marius O'Reilly died in a climbing accident, that sort of thing. Then the clan invasion, right? So Sean takes over, becomes Caesar. Caesar begins revamping expanded military between 3048 and 52. He more than triples the size of the realm's armed forces and reorganizes along Roman lines. Bulk of the new forces were battle mechs, which Caesar organized in 3 legions, each the size of a large regiment. Backed by increasingly powerful military, especially staunch loyalty of his former comrades in the First Marian Legion, Caesar also consolidated his personal political power. Those few voices that might have been raised against Sean's increasingly dictatorial rule were swiftly silenced by either promise of riches through conquest or by threat of force. Most hegemony citizens, unused to any great degree of freedom, hardly noticed the change. During this time, 2 more sons were born to the Caesar, each by different mistresses. Clan invasion, the Periphery and the inner sphere left the Marian hegemony untouched, and the rumors of war on distant planets provoked little concern among the hegemony citizens. Most agreed with their Caesar that the inner sphere was only getting what it deserved. As for the clan's conquests in the Periphery, the realm swallowed up were comfortably far from the hegemony's borders. When a delegation from the magistrate Canopus arrived on Alphard in 51, offered the Caesar a chance to join a Periphery-wide alliance against the invasion by the inner sphere, other forces scoffed at the proposal. Hoping to cause trouble for the Madrix, with whom his political and personal relations had always been strained, Sean made the Canopian proposal public to the inner sphere. No successor state responded with so much as a rebuke. because the successor lords, busy battling for their lives against the clan war machine, had no time for pronouncements of petty periphery dictator. Dismissing the clans as no particular threat to the hegemony, Caesar spent 3051 and most of 3052 planning the conquest of the nearby Lothian League. The League's 7 planets, resource-rich and poorly defended, presented a tempting target for the hegemony's new enlarged armies. So, if you can't expand by colonization and diplomacy, you do it by force, right? Conquering the league. So basically the hegemony launches an attack into the league and gets bogged down by it. Lothian League proved to be a tougher adversary than Caesar expected, holding out for more than a year against the Marian assault. Dame Lorena Lorgan dipped in deeply into Lothian treasury to hire additional mercenary units, and her daughter Lessel led a small home guard battle mech unit against the invaders with astonishing success. By early 3055, however, the Legion's superior firepower began to overwhelm the Lothian League's defenders. Dame Logan made a desperate appeal to the Turian Concordat for troops he could spare, but Protector Thomas Calderon refused to send help, citing the need to keep his troops on alert against danger of an imminent Federated Commonwealth attack, which we know from our previous videos that Protector Calderon was paranoid of the Federated Sons. Caesar himself led the assault on Lardax, the last League planet to fall. He destroyed the home guard, killing LaSalle Logan. Upon his triumphal landing on Lothario, the League's former capital world, the Caesar ordered Dame Laura Lee and her surviving family taken into custody. The Logans had disappeared, however, and presumably remained in hiding. Marian Hegemony faces a continued active and passive resistance from the Lothian citizens who refused to accept the Marian domination. Caesar's installed 2/3 of his military. 2/3 of the Second Marian Legion across 7 League worlds deal with the insurgents, but the Legion forces barely hold on to their own against the guerrilla occupants. Their opponents. Further, government officials installed in enact Caesar's policies must repeatedly deal with blatant disregard for their imposed authority. ROM reports indicate Lothian freedom fighters are receiving covert assistance from the magistrate of Canopus, which hopes to keep Caesar and his legions too busy for further conquests. And then we got Caesar and his heir, 3056, social political structure. The idea of a Roman Empire as in the barbaric periphery conjures a variety of images, few of them encouraging. Closer look at the Republican ideal as implemented in hegemony, however, reveals a structure not too far removed from the feudal system in place through much of the inner sphere and parts of periphery. Most Marian citizens accept the system without complaint, acknowledging that it beats the harsh dictatorship suffered by most of their neighbors. The people. All people in hegemony can be divided into 3 distinct social classes: the patricians, the upper class, the plebes or lower class, and slaves. First, the patricians are simply defined as those who own land, with all other citizens falling into the plebe class. Early on, wealthy plebes began buying land and titles, becoming patricians themselves. Patrician status is now hereditary, a nobility that differs little from the systems across the inner sphere. Since land ownership generally passed from parent to child anyway, few complained about the new order. Only patricians may vote or hold political office, attain high military rank, or own real estate. In effect, they represent the hegemony's legally perpetuated upper class. This system remains viable because the majority of the patricians realize they retain their position only on the severance of the plebes and treat their slaves and employees fairly. Under the increasingly harsh leadership of Caesar Seen and his supporters, however, the possibility of rebellion becomes more real with each passing day. Slavery is not uncommon in periphery, although the hegemony is one of the largest states to condone it. Because it is illegal to buy or sell a citizen of the hegemony, slaves are most often prisoners of war. Given enough time, a generous owner of a slave may eventually petition the Senate for citizenship, though such requests are rarely made and even more rarely granted. In order to win his freedom, a slave must prove his worth of hegemony and his ability to sustain himself and his family. In both cases, this usually amounts to large bribes to the proper senatorial council. Then we got the Senate, ruling body of the hegemony, the Caesar himself, interstellar relations. Seeing O'Reilly has made few friends for his realm, although the recent conquest of the Lothian League may open up markets for such Lothian products as copper and iron ores. Political relations with most periphery states are poor to non-existence, and the trade is minimal. Caesar may do better both economically and politically with the successor states whose need for germanium has grown with their increasing production of jump ships. The nations of the inner sphere are also less inclined than the periphery nations to fear a hegemony attack, as the Caesar is more likely to attempt a conquest of his smaller, less powerful periphery neighbors. Yeah, that would be foolhardy at best and suicidal at worst to openly attack one of the big great houses. They come after you with a vengeance. Sooner or later. Successor states, Comstor and the word of Blake. Comstor has historically had little influence in the Marian state, not least because of the Marian government's insistence on charging a hefty fee for operations. We have retained tenacious control over the HPG facility in Alphard, but the Caesar has begun to make noises about taking the HPG under direct imperial control. He has made no overt moves so far. The situation remains an uneasy stalemate, given the necessity of deploying all the comm guards elsewhere, plus the risk of provoking a confrontation by bringing even the smallest detachment into hegemony space. We may need to consider an alternative method to keeping an eye on developments in the Marian space. Another troubling development, word of Blake ROM agents appear to be frequent visitors to the imperial residence, and we have reason to believe that Caesar is negotiating with them to build HPD stations on other Marian worlds. If this is the case, the word of Blake will certainly use those facilities to further their own plans. Periphery nations, the Magistracy of Canopus and the Turian Concordat are the hegemony's main antagonists in the periphery, particularly since their recent alliance. Marian pilots have made a practice of raiding Canopian worlds almost since the hegemony's inception, and Caesar's increased military strength clearly makes Emma Centrella concerned for the Canopian border planets. The hegemony's ruthless war against the Lothian League outrights the protector of the Turian Concordat, and Geoffrey Calderon has joined the Magistracy in publicly condemning the Marian hegemony as a pharaoh state ruled by a conscienceless criminal whose actions threaten the stability of the entire periphery. Blah, blah. Marian hegemony military. Although the Marian legion suffered losses from final battle of the Lothian League, they have been nearly rebuilt to their former strength. Because of Caesar O'Reilly's reorganization of the armed forces, precise equivalents are not possible, but current Marian military strengths amount to roughly three battle mech regiments with nearly 3 times that number in conventional forces. Confident and aggressive, the legions are a fearsome, potent force. Most of the legionnaires are solidly loyal to their Caesar, as the military owes much of its current power and prestige to him. Caesar recently commissioned the building of another military academy, primarily intended to train aerospace pilots. Flight Academy Alphard is expected to open its doors in 3059, boasts 3 former Outworlds Alliance pilots among its staff. By training cadres of aerospace pilots, Caesar O'Reilly hopes to bridge the Marian Legion's only remaining weakness. Force composition and tactics. Originally, the 1st Marian Legion was organized the same fashion as the standard inter-sphere battle mech units. After Caesar O'Reilly's expanded the military, he reorganized the legions among lines of the armies of the ancient Roman Empire that once dominated Terra. The basic unit is the maniple. Consists of 5 battle mechs or vehicles. 2 maniples make a century. So in some ways, the Marian military is laid out not unlike the clan system of 5. It gives them an advantage when dealing with other more traditional military organizations who don't expect them to have the force setup that they do. Uniforms, officer ranks, Marian legions and deployment is at 3058. To the 1st Legion, 2nd Legion, 3rd Legion. Personalities, Caesar Sean O'Reilly, Julius O'Reilly. Julius is a young heir of the hegemony, looks much like his father, but strikingly different from him in disposition. Quiet and serious-minded, Julius appears to have little taste for personal power. He believes in the Caesar's right to rule, but he seems aware that the power he will one day wield carries great responsibilities. Hegemony citizens unhappy with Caesar's increasingly despotic rule see Julius as their hope for a somewhat freer society. 6 foot tall, slender build, Julius is quick and agile, traits central to his impressive performance as a mech warrior. Recently a graduate of the Collegium, he received command of a century in the First Marian Legion. He's also an accomplished martial artist and a talented swordsman. ROM agents report rumors that MEM agents from the Ministry of Canopus have contacted Julius in pursuit of ends that can be easily guessed, but such rumors fail to offer any information on the substance of any such meetings. The sharp eye of Caesar O'Reilly keeps on his air, makes it highly unlikely that any contact took place, as the Caesar would surely have responded. Right. So we're looking at, like I said, the Marian hegemony, and of all the minor periphery powers, this is one of the most expansive, I don't want to say, they're not by any means the most aggressive, because there's several that are just as equally aggressive, but given another 100 years, they could become rivals, or yet another, a fourth periphery power. To achieve this, they need to have probably at least 30 worlds. They need to have at least, close to 10 regiments of battle mechs and the equivalent supporting support unit. So they need to have a military that's equal to the existing periphery powers to make themselves a viable entity in that field. The longevity also is assisting their development. So they moved into the point where they're now 2 generations into their existence, with a potentially third generation in the wings ready to assume command in the near future, which means that they've been around for 50, 60 years, and they're developing the acceptance of the other periphery states and the inner sphere, even remotely, as a legitimate, if not upstart, questionable entity, means good things for the Marian hegemony. If luck holds out, given time, they have a significant chance of becoming a major periphery power in another 100 years, 100, 200 years. They could easily have that same history that we see in the Taurian Concordat and the Marian Canopus, and etc. So anyhow, this is Rick, and that's my opinion on the Marian hegemony. Till next time, I hope you guys have a great weekend.